Hi, and welcome to Stats Reacts, where we react from a statistical perspective on the Netflix show called 100 Humans. In this episode, we're going to focus on the issue of selection bias in the show. Let's start with the concept of the target population. This is the population that your research question is all about. And if it's possible to do your research study on the entire target population, this is called a census. But typically this is infeasible, so instead you will do your study on a sample. And it's important that the sample is representative of the target population so that you can make inferences about the larger population that you're interested in. In other words, your study will have external validity. Let's see what the Netflix show says about their population and their sample.
100 human beings of all ages and backgrounds, representing a cross-section of American society.
You heard that right. The target population of the show is the entirety of the United States. Their sample is a group of 100 participants. They say that they are selected from all ages and backgrounds to represent a cross-section of human society. But I can think of quite a few ways where this group of participants will be quite different from the target population. I don't know exactly how these people were recruited. I would think that they probably watched Netflix if they knew about this call for volunteers, and definitely that they consented to appear on TV. So they're okay with being in the public eye. The responses of this group to the experiments might not be representative of the target population. I noticed that quite a few of the experiments require participants to do physical activity. So it seems like people who are less able to do physical activity due to health conditions, for example, are excluded from the sample. Further, 100 is far too small a sample size to draw inferences about this population, but this is a topic for another video. We would say that there is a selection bias in the way in which the sample was collected. Selection bias is an issue in research too. If you've walked around on a university campus, you'll see many calls for volunteers for psychology experiments. But results obtained from studies conducted largely on undergraduate students don't necessarily apply to the general public. In clinical trials, there's often underrepresentation of older adults and other groups. So how do you go about obtaining a sample? Well, there are two broad approaches: the probabilistic approaches and the non-probabilistic approaches. In the probabilistic approach, you assume that you have a sampling frame. So this is a list of all the sampling units. This could, for example, be an electoral register, or a hospital register, or a list of businesses in your target population that you can sample from. In simple random sampling, all units have equal probability of being selected. In stratified sampling, the sampling frame is divided into strata, as illustrated with different colors. And usually the researcher wants to compare across the strata. So you would sample within each stratum with equal probability to make sure that you have representation from each stratum. One of the episodes compares people in different age groups. So this is an example of a situation where you might want to use a stratified sampling approach to make sure that each age group is well represented. Now in cluster sampling, your sampling frame is naturally divided into groups. These divisions are not imposed by the researcher, rather they might be geographic clusters such as districts where your sampling units are. And two-stage cluster sampling would proceed by first sampling the clusters, and then in the next stage, sampling units within the cluster. Probabilistic approaches generally avoid selection bias, allow you to estimate standard errors, and allow you to make inferences about your target population. Non-probabilistic approaches generally do not have these properties, and here you typically don't have a sampling frame. An example is convenience sampling, where you don't have a list of your sampling units, but you can access the people who could be in your sample in a convenient way, for example by using a survey on Twitter or speaking to people at the train station. Snowball sampling is a non-probabilistic approach that is typically used for hard-to-reach populations. This might be due to social stigma or it might be due to the fact that the condition you're interested in is rare. So typically you start by finding a few select people in this population, and through those people you try to find others. You can find out more about sampling methods in the links that I've put in the description box. Now, to conclude this video, I wanted to ask, what could the series have done to avoid this selection bias issue? Well, first of all, I think they could have chosen a narrower and more realistic target population. For example, this could have been the actors and actresses in the top 5 Netflix films this year, and use some kind of a recruitment and sampling approach that could create a representative sample. Of course, this probably isn't realistic because of how expensive it would be to get these actors and actresses. Alternatively, if they wanted to keep these 100 human participants, they could be more transparent and say that their conclusions are mostly descriptive, pertaining to these 100 people in the program, and that it's not really drawing any conclusions about the United States. What do you think? Thanks for joining me, and see you in the next episode.